everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast. I am, as always, Jason Haas. Back after missing a session 2 weeks ago because I was in Japan as part of what was a really cool Wine Institute and Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance tour of Japan and Korea. So hopefully you will be seeing more Tablas Creek wines in Asia and more Paso Robles wines in Asia, more awareness of Paso wines in the Asian markets. If you want to get a sense of what that was like, that was the subject of my blog this week. So check that out if that sounds like fun. You may notice that I'm inside, which I don't normally choose to be, but we are expecting what feels like our, 25th rainstorm this winter. That's about to hit us this afternoon. This is all good. The rain has been outstanding. None of it too heavy or damaging. No erosion. It's been nice and cool, which is good because it helps delay bud break. This is really a good thing. This has been kind of a perfect winter. We're already at about our annual winter average for rainfall, even though it's still only the middle of March. So we'll probably end up above. We're at about 130% of normal year to date. But even if we don't, we're already set. It could stop raining tomorrow and we would still be in good shape. So that's super exciting. The vineyard looks great. The cover crop looks amazing. I think everything is set up for a really, really good vintage. In the cellar, our big news is that we have been getting stuff into bottle and into box. So in terms of bottle, we've been bottling things like Counoise and Senso, some of the early drinking 2022 vintage reds, Grenache and Côte Tablas that are going to go out to Wine Club members next month, and Terre Noire, which is, I think, really fun that we have that again. So we have some of that. We just announced the release of our Patelin Rosé boxes yesterday. And that giant whooshing sound you hear is all of the Patelin Rosé boxes heading out into the world. So that is, if that's something that you want, fair warning that it's likely to be gone in the next few days. So jump in if you do. And thank you, everybody who has ordered already or is going to be getting some in the wholesale world. So my guest this week is writer and sommelier, event planner, Brianne Cohen. I'm super excited to talk to her. So I see her, she just joined, so I'm going to invite Brianne to be up. You can get to hear from her directly, but I'm super excited to talk to her because I think she does such cool stuff. Hey, Brianne.
Hey, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. Happy Wednesday.
Yeah. Happy Wednesday. Is it raining down in LA?
Not yet. It's gloomy and it's thinking about it. So is it raining up there in Paso?
We've gotten a couple sprinkles go through. It looks like the serious rain's still a little bit offshore, but it's coming.
Yeah.
It's why I'm inside and not outside, because I looked at the radar, was like, yeah, if I'm outside, I'm running inside 10 minutes into this conversation because I'm getting wet.
As someone who works in the vineyards, I feel like you have a keener sense of the weather than me, a writer here in LA. I just look outside going, ooh. But you really know what's going on.
I feel like I have an unhealthy obsession with the weather, current and present and past. So yes, I do tend to know what the weather is likely to be in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 2 days.
Love it.
Awesome. So I generally like to start by asking wine writers who I talk to, which came first, the interest in the writing or the interest in the wine?
Definitely the interest in the wine. Doesn't that always happen first?
No, honestly,
Really?
It's sort of surprising, but I think the majority of the answers I've gotten have been that writing came first.
Oh, interesting. No, I think I was always a natural communicator, but I am painfully shy, which most people don't know or realize when they meet me, because I've now kind of grown comfortable with, meeting people and just being in communication a lot. But for me, it was the wine. I was, as I always say, I was that person in college, if we can all put our hats back onto that time, who was drinking wine, which was like no one, and yeah. I was the one with my $2 or $4 grocery store wine, and I felt so sophisticated. I loved it. I loved whatever, I didn't know anything about it. I just knew that I enjoyed the beverage. I enjoyed wine. And there was something else that went along with it that I just, couldn't, at that point, I didn't know what it was. But now, obviously, it's been 20 years now. Now I understand, like, there is so much more than the wine in the glass, which is sort of like what I'm always trying to communicate, because wine in the glass is a pretty boring thing to look at. It is our whole lives for many of us, but you're either looking at a yellow or a red liquid in a glass, and that's pretty boring. So how can we bring that to life as grape growers, winemakers, writers, communicators, whatever that is?
Wait, so, and I want to dig into that, because I think that's super interesting. And the blog that you wrote last week kind of tackles that head on. But going back, so how did you find out that you loved wine? Like, was it on your family table growing up, or was it something that you came to on your own?
Yeah, definitely on the family table, but I had an interesting upbringing that I think is common for a lot of people. I had two kitchen tables. My parents were divorced when I was very young, so I was spending time in both households. So I have two families, very different, right? One side of my family, my dad's side, is from Argentina. And so I grew up speaking Spanish. My dad was born in Argentina. That culture and lifestyle, which, if people don't know Argentina, we're Italian. I mean, that's really how to understand Argentina. It has less in common with other countries in Latin America and more in common with Europe, just in the sense of how, sort of we live our lives down there. And 85% of people, I think, that live in Argentina can trace their ancestry back to Italy. Like, I did my DNA and I'm 40% Italian. So wine, pasta, pizza, food, loud, boisterous. That was one kitchen table I had. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is fun. And then the other side of my family, my mom's house, total American. I mean, I grew up with hamburger helper, tuna helper, anything with a casserole after it, like super Americana style, no wine in sight, no alcohol in sight, soda and water. So I had really two different upbringings. So, I had both of these going on, but I definitely culturally attached a lot to Argentina and sort of that life. And I visited many, many times as a child and an adult. And that's sort of where I started going, oh, this is interesting. But in Argentina, very much like in a lot of places in Europe, wine is more of a commodity. It's like water on the table. It's not this sort of precious studied thing that we kind of think of here sometimes. So it wasn't really a thought. It was just like, oh, I like this. Whatever this is, I like it. And then I'm in college drinking my cheap, kind of crappy wine. Then eventually I sort of realized I drank this stuff. I loved it, but I knew nothing about it. And I wanted to learn more.
So can you talk a little bit about your pre-wine career?
Yeah, of course. I pretty much had two different careers. I mean, every decade I sort of seemed to reinvent myself. Growing up as a child, I was always interested in fashion, and now here I am with my winemaker vest, as I say. So we've changed a lot. But growing up as a kid, I collected Vogue. I was really into fashion. All I wanted to do was work in the fashion business, and I did do that for 10 years. I was a sales rep, and I worked selling women's accessories to department store buyers. And that was really fun. And that really stretched that side of my brain that I really enjoy, that creative side. But also, as we're talking about this, it got me into food and wine, because I found myself going to New York 6 times a week for 6 times a year for Market Week, which is a big thing that we do in the fashion industry. Go to Market Week, meet your buyers. And that's when I started being exposed to wining and dining. I mean, I did not grow up with that at all. There was no fine dining, nothing in my upbringing. So I had to, it's kind of like the movie Pretty Woman. I had to learn which piece of silverware we're using right now. I didn't know how any of it worked. So that was my first career. I worked for 10 years in fashion, got a little disenchanted with that and didn't want to be part of such a consumeristic, consumer focused, kind of thing, consumerism focused. And then after that, I'd been told by a few people in my life that I was really good at planning parties. When I would plan someone's event or party, they said I did a really good job. And I thought, all right, I'm kind of done with fashion. Why don't I become an event producer? That sounds fun. And so I started volunteering with nonprofits, and I kind of learned that they needed events, but they didn't have a lot of money, and I needed experience. So I started doing that. And that's how that literally has led to, that was in 2007. And I've had my own event production business since 2008. And I focus on producing nonprofit events for LGBT and performing arts organizations across California. I love that. I've been doing, like I said, that's about 15 years of my life. But along the way, wine took hold, and it wasn't really until the pandemic that I got to really embrace wine as, you know, a true business for me. So yeah, I consider myself now an event producer and also a wine educator. They both kind of go hand in hand.
So you're seems like one of the relatively rare kind of wine writer, wine professional, sommelier trained folks who didn't come at this through the restaurant world.
Mm-hmm.
So how, like, what was behind your decision to kind of dive in and like go the WSET route and really get yourself trained up on wine?
Yeah. I mean, I like I said, I wanted to learn more, and I think I just came across the WSET. Maybe, you know, I live in Los Angeles. We have a great sort of like old school generalist wine shop called the Wine House. It's been around for a few decades. Many people know it.
Great spot.
Oh, it's great. I mean, yes, we like our new fancy places and natural wine bars and all that, but it's something about just a good old fashioned warehouse with like cases of wine everywhere. Just like makes my heart sing. So I was there shopping, and I think I saw a flyer for a WSET class, decided to take it. It was, you know, it was WSET level 2. They didn't even offer one at that point. They just said we're in California. Level 1 is just, no, there's grapes, make wine. That's level 1. So I did level 2. It was like a 1-day class, kind of wine, you know, it felt like wine appreciation, sort of. You learned a little bit about some basic regions, you know, classic regions in the world. Loved it. And then of course they're like, well, if you sign up today for level 3, you get, you know, $100 off or something. Well, let's do it. So I signed up for level 3, and which was, you know, like it was once a week for maybe 10 weeks or something, 3 hours, like a nighttime class, very manageable when you're working and whatnot. And I took these classes at the Wine House, and I just loved it. I was like, this is when I learned. I mean, like literally, I would say on the job, but I wasn't working, you know, in school, I like learned. I said, oh, so certain grapes are grown in certain places. Like I had no idea. Like, why would anyone know that? So I always try to remember that when I'm doing education and talking to consumers, and try to get in their shoes of, you know, what info they might have and not have. So took level 3, WSET level 3. I loved it. I was totally obsessed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just barely unlocking, you know, you get like 10 minutes on each wine region, and it's just like such a broad overview. All right, what's next? And they're like, oh, well, the next one is WSET level 4 diploma. And it jumps. All of a sudden it's 3 years and like $10,000. Whoa. Slow down. So that was like a hard no. I was like, nope, I'm good. This was lovely. Thank you. I'm going to go drink now and enjoy everything I learned. And it was about a year that I had taken off, and I got married in that time, and I had been with my husband, or my boyfriend at that time, for 10 years. We'd been together a long time. And I was telling him how much I missed it. I miss studying. I just miss learning. One of my best friends as well kind of said something to me. You know, both of them were really, you know, important decision makers in that time, because they both said, just go for it. Just do it, you know. And I am not a risk taker. I forget what that movie is. I think it's Along Came Polly, where what's his name? Somebody can tell me if they remember in the chat. He like assesses risk for a living. Ben Stiller, and he's so risk averse, and that is me. So I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't have a plan. They're like, Brianne, you don't need a plan. I know you're a planner, but you don't need a plan. This is something you love. You should do it. My husband's like, we'll make payments over 3 years. We'll do it. And it was the best decision I ever made. And my life changed when I finished the diploma. I started in 2015, finished in 2018, went to London for my graduation in 2019 and shaked Steven Spurrier's hand, which felt like a very big deal. And I was like, I want wine to somehow be a part of what I do for work, for my living. And so that's when I kind of started figuring out, how can I monetize essentially what I've just done. Yeah.
So where did the writing come in? So at what point did you decide, okay, here's at least a piece of the niche that I want to occupy?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I can say this confidently because I'm very much an open book. I've never been trained in writing. I've never taken a journalism class in my life, maybe high school when you did the yearbook or something. So I am learning all the things as I go. But the writing came on board actually in 2015 was when I signed up for the diploma. I think around that time I saw the movie Somm that many of us saw. whoa, what's this about? This like mysterious, obscure thing. And these people know so many crazy facts. I don't think I'm ever going to get there, but I was really interested in just their path. And I thought it was fascinating. And at that moment, that's sort of the advent of like the, I don't know, celebrity sommelier moment. And all of a sudden these somms were kind of cool and hip. And I was like, wow, this is so fascinating. And people who don't know anything about wine are kind of interested. They're interested in getting behind this curtain and seeing what this world's about. So I signed up for the diploma within like a month. I signed up for the diploma. I started a blog on Blogspot or something. It was so terribly embarrassing looking and everything. And I thought, because I watched that movie and I realized just how people were starting to just talk about wine in a different way and they were interested in it. So I said, I'm going to actually just document my journey. Spent, $10 on the domain. I'm going to just document my journey, talk to these people, probably my mom and like 2 friends, right? About my journey and what I was doing, what I was learning, what I was studying, and just see where it goes. And so I started a blog in 2015, and then I literally Googled like how to start a wine blog. And I came up with the Wine Bloggers Conference. It is now actually the Wine Media Conference. And in two weeks later, I was in the Finger Lakes of New York. I used my miles. I found a roommate to keep it cheap. And I all of a sudden was thrust into this world. There were probably 200 wine bloggers, writers, communicators in one room. And I think all of that, it just was a very quick immersion moment where I was like, whoa, I don't know what this is, but I'm so glad I'm into this. And then it just sort of happened. So blogging, starting in 2015, 2019, maybe towards the end of 2019, but when things were still normal, I thought I want to have a piece published in an outlet.
Right.
I think I set a deadline for myself. I forgot what it was. And I had met other writers at the Wine Bloggers Conference every year because I'd been going every year since then. And I literally remember having a call with 2 friends of mine. They're a married couple who write. And I said, hey, how do I write? Like, how do I pitch? I don't know this ecosystem.
Right.
And they were so kind and gave me some information. And that's kind of what I did. And it was probably one of my first or second pitch, I got accepted. I had just been in the Willamette Valley. I had been tasting a lot of interesting Gamay, which everyone talks about Pinot and Chard. And I thought, ooh, don't sleep on Gamay. And I think that was the title, Gamay, Oregon's Dark Horse or something. And I got to write a piece. Didn't know how to do it, but I figured it out and I got published. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I guess I'm a published writer now. And then the pandemic hit and everything changed.
Yeah, seriously. So, okay, so talk about that. Talk about all of a sudden, so many of the ways in which we were all used to interacting, and certainly wineries were used to interacting with customers, wine shops were used to interacting with, like those all disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
So how did you adjust to that? What was next for you?
Yeah. I mean, I had a very jarring adjustment. The live event industry was one of the first and hardest affected industries. So there was no like, oh, I was baking bread for a few months waiting to see if I was going to get laid off or something. Like a lot of people were in this weird place. It was immediately 100% of the revenue of my business that I had built over the last 13 years, zero. Within 7 to 10 days. I mean, that's how quick it was. Oh, all right. How am I paying rent? How am I going to figure out my life? And that was all I was doing. I had already started this wine education business. I wanted to go into corporate spaces and do wine tasting as like a team building, culture building activity. It's a little hard to get that off the ground. I spent a year working on that, but I just had trouble. This is pre-pandemic. Right. So pandemic hit, I lose 100% of the revenue of my business overnight. Every contract, every client, every event canceled. And I can't even explain it. I mean, and going back to painfully shy introvert, had never done anything like this. I'd never hit record on my phone and put my face on the screen. And I immediately thought, I think there's a way we can taste wine while at home. I don't know what it is, but I think it's possible. I started seeing people doing some virtual things. This is like the first week I'm talking about. And so March 19th, I looked at my husband and I said, I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to host a virtual wine tasting. It's going to be next Friday, March 19th. I'm going to put it on Eventbrite. I'm going to see what happens. I'm pretty sure it's going to be just like my mom and a couple of friends, but let's just see how this goes. I had 125 people on that Zoom. I didn't even know how to use Zoom. I had 20 people on my email list. So, it was weird how the universe works. So I'm going to fast forward that story. I hosted that virtual wine tasting. It was a massive success. I pretty much told everyone, let me know what's in your glass. And if you have a burning wine question, send it over. And so I essentially had the content ahead of time. I knew what people were drinking, so I could kind of bring people in and connect with them in a two-dimensional virtual world. I just kind of already knew, I was like, this is going to be confusing or complicated, but I know I can figure it out. And it was a massive success. And that literally turned into my event business had crumbled overnight. And, during the pandemic, over the course of about 3 years, I hosted 250 virtual wine tastings corporate for about 7,000 people. And I had my best years in business revenue wise were 2020 and 2021. So literally everything went to hell in a handbasket. I built up bigger than I'd ever done. And I spent the entire pandemic behind a green screen, or now I've got this peel and stick wallpaper, delivering really fun and approachable conversational wine tasting experiences for groups. And so that's turned into this essentially. And also this is when I first clicked, record on a video saying, hi, this is what I'm drinking right now. The things that everybody does all day long, but I would not be caught dead doing that. I was terrified, but I just, the pandemic changed everything for me. And I really just embodied a totally different mindset. And as I look at it, like the gift and the challenge, I mean, it was the most challenging time for me personally. I mean, I lost people very close to me to COVID early on. It was very trying and challenging, but I found something that I don't think without a global pandemic would have happened. I found something within myself that I'm so glad has kind of come out.
I feel all of that. And I know, I feel like we learned more in the first 6 months of COVID about our own business, about our customer, about marketing than we had learned in 10 years before.
Yeah. You had to just all of a sudden, it's like everything you knew was out the door, and you really had having that ability to think and see clearly and in a fresh way was such a gift, I think for a lot of people.
Yep. Okay. So you were recently tasked by Decanter to come and do a vintage report on Paso Robles for 2021.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Slightly terrifying at first, going back to I'm an open book. I'm going to be, it was so easy and no big deal. It was like, I have to tell the story of an entire region in one entire year in 1,500 words. Wow. That's a big undertaking. And I've always been very keenly aware that the wine business, and I think of grape growers and winemakers specifically, like y'all have, let's call it 30 vintages to in your life, like whatever, whenever you start, about 30 vintages, 30 chances to do something important or big or special, whatever, however you want to look at it. Whereas most of us in our careers and jobs get these kind of different opportunities that willy-nilly sort of come about or whatever, and we can change jobs and pivot and all these things. But if you're really digging your heels in the ground, so to say, it's quite a humbling experience, I think, growing grapes and making wine. I haven't done it myself, but it's like, wow, you really put a lot on the line to make that happen. So I've always been going back to writing and communication, I've always been just keenly aware of telling that story, because it is it's really easy to be a wine critic. We're all classically trained and we can give points and we can do all those things, and I never want to be the person poo-pooing someone's year's work. I just don't. That's not where my voice is useful. There's other voices that can do that. Totally fine. Everyone do what they need to do. But for me, this vintage report was a chance to tell the story of this region, in one particular year. And it's a newer to me region. I mean, I've lived in California almost my whole life, but I hadn't been to Paso until very early in the pandemic. I came for a visit. So 2020 was my first time in Paso. So I had heard all of the rumors, reputation from decades back, just had never made it up there for no particular reason. Went up there, saw how special it was, and was like, oh, this is like a very exciting place right now. So I was terrified at first because I didn't know how to approach a vintage report. But I'm really, really good at asking questions and asking for help. So that's exactly what I did. I leaned on my fellow colleagues in the industry and said, hey, how do you write a vintage report? What do you like to do? What do you like to see? And I found it essentially, I mean, planning an event is project management. That's what you're doing. You're project managing. You know, you're figuring out who are the wineries I'm gonna taste, who am I gonna interview, and how am I gonna put all this information together. So it's I can project manage myself out of a box. So I found it, once I dug into it, I found it really, really, I found it was fascinating, and I just felt very honored to have the opportunity to hear from, you know, boots on the ground in a region what was going on. And it wasn't me telling a story, it was y'all telling me the story that I had to distill down into, you know, 1,500 words for the Decanter reader.
Well, you did pretty well in starting with like maybe the best vintage that any of us can remember in the last, at least in the last decade. So
yes.
It's always nice.
Yes, 2021 was fantastic for Paso, so that was also nice.
Cool. So can you talk a little bit about like what kind of stories you particularly like to tell?
Mm-hmm. You know, I have a broad interest in a lot of things related to wine. So I think there's definitely writers who are more like, you know, in the wine space, maybe they're a little bit more lifestyle focused or travel, or, you know, they're not going to deep dive into like the wines or the technical stuff. And then there's the people who do like really like hard hitting journalism. And, you know, there's just all these different buckets of people. And going back to, I wasn't like classically trained in this world, and I don't have a bucket. So I'm just kind of figuring out the buckets that work for me. And like, just a couple, you know, places that I like to, things that I like to write about. I like to write about kind of the unexpected. You know, I am very, very lucky that I get to go on a lot of different press trips and visit regions around California, the country, the world. And press trips are sort of like everyone gets the same exact experience from start to finish. But somehow we all write different stories. So how does that work? And the way it works is you have to like listen, depends on who you're sitting next to at each event and meal and things like that. So unexpected, you know, stories that are not sort of the surface is what's interesting to me. A couple like pieces that I've written about that were just sort of these little snippets that I got, just, it's like one sentence I hear from someone, and then 6 months later, that's a published story. And an example is, the aging vineyard hands of Collio. I was on a press trip to Collio, Italy, right on the border of Italy and Slovenia. And it's a very special place, frozen in time, a few decades behind us. Really, really lovely, quaint, you know, kind of an old school sort of place. And I'm sitting at lunch with this grape grower and winemaker, and he tells me that there's this woman in his vineyard that is 90 years old. She does the harvest season every year, and she's 90. I was like, what? That's wild. So we just started chatting, and, you know, he said, it's actually very common here. We don't exactly have a big labor pool in this little itty bitty town on the border of Slovenia. 90% of the wineries are family owned. So it's kind of like you get your cousin, your brother, the neighbors. And I thought that was such a fascinating story that like people, you know, we're all in the wine world, and, you know, we're kind of jaded. We like see all these things, but it's like, that's so interesting, I think, to somebody. And, you know, it's these little bits of information that help people understand why a bottle of wine is so special. Another fun story was the disappearing terraced vineyards of Valtellina. Valtellina is up in northern Italy, and it's exactly as I'm saying. They were like really steep terraced vineyards, like very harrowing to go visit. Make some beautiful, beautiful wines from Schiavanesca or Nebbiolo, and they're disappearing. People, you know, young people don't want to stay in this small region of Valtellina and grow grapes and make wine. And what are we going to do about it? And so telling that story is, I think, just important.
Absolutely. And that sort of ties into the thing you mentioned earlier that was in the blog that you published last week, where I think you titled it, Why is Wine Important? And you started, wine is not important. But instead it's the stories around wine that make it interesting. And like, I love that perspective. Do you want to talk a little more about it?
I'd love to. Yeah. So I published that last week. I haven't even promoted it. It's funny. That's in my, I'm trying to figure out how to share that, but I actually call it a friend of mine. She consulted with me during the pandemic because my business grew so fast. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just like moving so fast. So I brought her in to just help me get sorted. And one day I walk in, or I said, Lauren, I said, I had this, like, it was like a dream or like an acid trip. I've never done acid, but I think this is what I said. I just unlocked my why. And she's like, tell me. and I, pretend this is a glass of wine. I told her this acid trip that I had that is, essentially become this like why wine is important or not important. And it's essentially that, in the wine world, the glass of wine is the main focus, is the main event, is the star, right? And that's all we want to talk about. We can geek out about the disappearing terrace vineyards of Valtellina or whatever little thing we're going to talk about. But that is very uninteresting, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, very uninteresting to a lot of people. And it's a pretty boring thing to look at. And how can we convey what is so special about this liquid in our glass? And it's really just a series of zooming out. You have the glass, boring, not really, people are like, alcohol, yay, or how much is it? Or, is the winery, if I'm there, is it an Instagrammable picture? It's like just very basic surface information. So glass of wine, and then you zoom out and it's on a table. Maybe there's some food on the table. Then we can start having conversations around food and wine and how it plays together, and cultural stuff and politics and just all these things. Then you zoom out and there's people at the table. And then you also have the influence of the people and who you're with and how you feel. And we talk about this, I think, in wine a lot. And the greater, wine drinking, people, sort of just regular consumers don't think about it. Wine totally changes in the glass all the time. When you go on your honeymoon in Tuscany and have that glass of Chianti, and then all of a sudden you come home and have a glass of Chianti, it doesn't always taste the same. The romance might be gone. You don't have all the same, feelings. Are you sitting next to someone? Are they laughing and you're telling a joke? Is someone being politically incorrect and it's horribly uncomfortable? Your wine and your perception of your senses is going to change. So I just had this like acid trip of like the wine, the table, the food, the people, and then where are you? Are we sitting here drinking wine in Paso? Am I sitting up at Tablas Creek? Are we, in Bangkok? Are we in Turkey? Like, where are we? And all of these things change and make the liquid in the glass a little bit more interesting. And I think that's kind of my why. Like, why is wine important? It's not actually. We think it is, but I really don't think it is. You don't need it to survive. But the context around wine is, to me, what's important.
Totally. I think it's such a like crystal clear way of thinking about all of this. I love it.
Yeah.
So are there areas that you feel like in general, like wine journalism or wine coverage in America kind of falls short? Like, are there things that you see that are like, yeah, this is a hole that feels like people aren't thinking about it the right way, or like maybe it's even as simple as, well, I want to do that because I don't see anybody doing this particular thing in this particular way.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I had an editor tell me once that American wine writers are a lot more complimentary about what like the subjects they're writing about and the brands they're writing about and the wines they're writing about. Whereas, maybe in Europe or the old world, they're a little bit more critical, So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I noticed that in my writing as well. Sometimes I try to, our duty as a writer is not to the brand, the wine, the subject, it's to our reader. How are we going to enrich their lives? And so what I think is interesting is there's lots of different, facets of wine writing that I see out there. I also have no problem. And, you asked earlier what kinds of pieces I like to write. I love good old fashioned, like listicles, where to eat, drink, and sleep. Like, those are important. Like, talk about conveying information quickly and efficiently for people. I don't poo-poo that at all. So I look at that piece, and then, a hard-hitting journalistic piece about wine in Armenia that I read recently as, like, I wouldn't say equally important, but they both have validity in the world. It's kind of like how I look at wine, which is that there's I can find a place and a time for any glass of wine. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to all be expensive or all be fancy or anything like that. We can find it. So I think in writing, it's important to, like, what I would like to see more of, going back to your original question, because I'm kind of all over the place here, but I know it's in my head, is distilling this down, is that I love the good old fashioned, here's, the wine recs, the listicle, the like where to drink, what to enjoy. And I think that's super helpful for consumers. And I think we have a good amount of that out there. I don't see as much, and I'm kind of toying with this too. I'll be vulnerable now, of people really sticking their neck out, And I don't mean like critiquing a wine or anything like that. I just mean about there's a little bit of the, like, we're just here to talk about wine. Are we? We're talking about life. I don't know. It's like everything fits within each other. And I just don't always like to isolate things. And it kind of, this can get political and things like that, where it's like, I see some writers that say, I'm not going to have any political conversations with any of my subjects, or I'll interview anyone, or I'll write about any brand, whatever. And it's like, I'm not like that. There are definitely brands that, and just people and regions and things that I won't touch because it doesn't align with my values. And so I kind of don't see a ton of that out there. And I think it would be just interesting to have a little bit more like thoughtful wine journalism. And who knows, maybe that'll be me one day. I just haven't gotten there yet, and I don't exactly know how to get there. But that would be just kind of interesting, to not always just focus on the wine and the rosy stuff, to make it a little thought provoking, because, we're at a time in our world and our country where there's just so many things going on, and we can't compartmentalize anymore.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of a conversation I had with Esther Mobley a few years ago, where she was talking about how I think we were talking about the kind of decline overall in newspaper coverage of wine, that there are very few newspapers that even have a dedicated wine writer, and the Chronicle has two. And just talking about how, from her lens, I mean, wine is interesting not because she's writing about wine, but because wine is so embedded in what's going on in the Bay Area that she gets to write stories about everything from fires to climate change to gentrification to agriculture to you name it, all through the kind of prism of wine. But it is a rare thing, I think, and I think you're right that a lot of times the approach to wine writing is, okay, let's get a particular thing into your glass. And that's like this much of the world.
Yeah, and I think it's more like, let's get this thing into your glass and let's have some bigger conversations. Totally. I think that's possible. So we'll see where that ends up.
Yeah. Okay. I cannot believe that it has been half an hour, but it has been half an hour already. I have like 5 more questions I wanted to ask you, but I think I should probably wrap up by saying, like, how do people read? How do they follow you? How do they read the stuff that you write? Is there a place where they can go to see all of it? What do they do?
Yeah. So the best thing is to stay up with me on Instagram here. So Somspirations, you've got the handle. And when you click the link in my bio there, you'll get like a little shortcut to a few different options. So I have a biweekly newsletter, Som Things, Your Wine Intake, where I share new articles, new blog posts, trips I've gone on, an incredible bottle that I have with a link, so you can buy it. Cause I also think that's important too. It's like, I'll talk about all the like small, boutique producers that you can like never find. But then I also want to discuss and talk about wines that like y'all can easily get, in your glasses. So my biweekly newsletter, Some Things, is a great way to stay in touch with me. All of this you see on Instagram. And then on my website, which is in the link in my bio, you'll see it, there's my blog there. Any of the articles that I write, for other outlets and publications are on my website. And I'm also frequently quoted in larger publications, things like Forbes, HuffPost, CNN, and stuff like that, when I do have to give those, Som approved wine recs and listicle type stuff that is just, like I said, I think also important. So when you're looking for your like summer sippers and your New Year's bubbles and things like that. So it's all, follow me on the gram. I'm there regularly, and that's a great place to see what's going on in my world and in my glass.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brianne. Thank you for joining me. This conversation has been such a pleasure. So,
Jason, it's always a pleasure, and keep making great wine. I can't wait to keep drinking it.
I'll do my best. Awesome.
All right.
Super.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye, Tablas Creek folks. I'll see you again in 2 weeks.